Hey you guys, welcome to Regardless. I am so excited to have you here. Regardless is the go-to hub for tips and tools to keep you going, babe, reminding you that you've got this. Everyone, I am so excited to have such a beautiful soul inside and out. I met this incredible woman, I think like 2 years ago.
At least.
Crazy.
Yeah.
At a beautiful aloe event, and I think it was like International Women's Day.
Yeah.
And you spoke, and your energy, you meet some people in life where they're just able to kind of have like a sense immediately of like who you are. And I felt that with you, and your ability to hold space for people, and just your energy is so soothing and electric at the same time. And when thinking about my podcast and who I want to bring on to share their stories, their tips, their tools, like you are the epitome of that.
Thank you.
So with no further ado, I would love to introduce you all to Natalie Valle, who is literally a jack of all trades. She is a multidisciplinary practitioner. She just signed with Nike as their mindfulness coach, which is unbelievable. And Natalie is also certified in so many things, including a master in Reiki. She's also a yoga instructor, a meditation coach, a Dharma coach. She has her certification in soundology. I mean, the list goes on with the impact that you are creating in this world. And you are also the podcast host of an incredible podcast called Practical Alchemy Podcast. And I'm just speechless. So welcome to Regardless.
Thank you. I mean, wow. As a podcast host myself, the fact that you just gave that intro from your heart and also memorized it is very impressive. And I wish you could introduce me everywhere I go.
Literally like your personal hype woman. Like anywhere, invite me and I will be introducing you because you deserve the best. And I think before like we dive in, I listened, which is so funny, but this morning when I was getting ready, I decided to listen to your first ever podcast episode. And it was a really cool moment for me because as I was getting ready for my day, I was able to just breathe with you. And that was a really cool moment for me because I have a really hard time fitting breath work into my everyday. And I do know how flipping important it is, especially for my personality. But one of the main things and points that stuck out to me from your first episode was really like this word of alchemy and your mission, which is to bring really alchemization to people's lives. And a lot of people I don't think actually know what that word means. So to begin, like I would love to understand your definition of alchemy.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's funny that you should say that about the breath work because it is so hard to mindfully breathe throughout the day because our minds are pulled in so many directions. I was actually driving from, where I live all the way to where we're recording, driving through LA, and I found myself feeling just the reality of sitting in traffic and being overwhelmed. And I literally started doing box breathing as I was driving, and it's sometimes that simple. It's just not commonly practiced. And so for anyone listening, don't be discouraged if you're like, oh my God, I haven't consciously breathed in days.
Yeah.
The beautiful part of it is that you can start at any point, right? In this moment as you're listening, maybe you just take a big breath in and exhale, let it go. It always makes me feel better, at least. And thank you for listening to the first episode. Oh my gosh, I need to go back and listen. I don't even know what I said. But alchemy is, I'll start with sort of when that word became important to me. So many of you have probably heard of, if not read the book, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And I'll never forget, that book came into my life in such a magical way. It was recommended to me by my very best friend. And then I was like, I think I was a sophomore in college or something. I was at an old used bookstore, just browsing through, and this book, like, almost not jumped at me, but I just immediately connected to it. and changed my life. If you haven't read this book, it is a classic. It's such an easy read. It's a fun read because it's fiction, and it's so impactful. And so I always loved this idea of alchemy and what an alchemist was. And, you know, dating back through history, alchemists were those who were able to take basic metals, basic elements, and turn them into gold. And that was sort of like, it's magic, right? It was this sort of magic process of turning basic elements into gold. And so for me, I feel like I've always had the ability to perceive the situations in my life in a way that I can find the silver lining. I can find the gift. I can find the treasures in the triggers and the treasures in the trauma, right? And I really feel like this theme of alchemy has just always been something I've been drawn to, of, for lack of better words, turning the, you know, the crap in life and turning it into gold, taking what, you know, life hands you of sometimes lemons and making lemonade. And so to me, alchemy just means having the tools and the resources to take any situation, any hardship, any challenge, any learning lesson, and be able to extract the gold, the elixir out of it, and allow it to promote your growth, your healing, your expansion, and be an alchemist in that way.
Wow, that is super powerful. And it's so cool, I think, especially as women, when we start to find like common themes in our life. Especially for me this morning when I was listening to your first episode, I was like, oh my goodness, Natalie and I have so much in common. And I think a lot of the commonalities that we share are like some of the challenges and the adversities that we've experienced that are more similar than, you know, we would maybe, we wouldn't know that unless we were able to like take back the layers and listen and you know, want to understand. And I think what's super cool about, you know, what you're creating at Love and Alchemy, and regardless, is that it really is this switch that, you know, regardless of what's showing up in your life or what challenge you face or are facing, like, this is an opportunity to learn, to grow, to evolve, to fight for your future self. And I think that formula or that experience is, you know, that is alchemy in a way.
Yeah.
So I just had to share that with you because it's super cool just to see just, you know, the impact that we are wanting to create, and the fact that we get to sit here today together and see what we can discover.
Yes, you know, it reminds me, a dear friend, DeAndre, he's an incredible yoga teacher, practitioner. One time he said to me, I'm realizing that my mess is my message. And I was like, whoa. Wow. You know, as somebody who is an impact leader, somebody who's driven to create impact in the world through sharing, whether it's yoga, meditation, or you're a coach, or you want to write a book, or whatever it is, right? Or even, you know, you share your medicine through cooking, right? I feel like we each have a story, and our story is our own, and it's what we make of it. And sometimes for those who are impact leaders, a lot of the times our mess is our message, and being able to own that and embrace all aspects of yourself, even the ones that are messy, that we're ashamed of, and just be proud of who we are and everything that's made us who we've become today, can really help so many people. Because at the basis of so much suffering is just common humanity, right? We all want to feel loved. Yes. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel worthy, right? These themes are at the basis of so much suffering that manifests in different ways. And I feel like finding common ground can also help us come together and humanize one another, but also can help us realize that we can help so many people by being ourselves and overcoming our adversities. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just pausing because your energy is so beautiful and your message. And I think one of the reasons why you are the way you are, I'm assuming, is because of your background and your mess. And I would love to learn a little bit more about your background. And where you came from. Like, who is Natalie Valle?
Thank you for pronouncing my last name correctly.
Oh my gosh, thank God. A lot of people probably do not say it correctly.
Well, I think this can also be part of me sharing my story, because all of our stories are so multifaceted, right? And there are different versions that I tell of it. But how it pertains to my last name, so we can start with where I grew up. So my parents are both Salvadorian. I'm first generation daughter of immigrants, and my parents fled El Salvador during the Civil War when they were young with their families. Their parents gathered their kids, and they were like, if we don't leave, we're probably not going to make it. And so my parents, coincidentally, serendipitously, they both immigrated to Virginia, and that's where I was born. And then the year that I was born, the peace treaty was signed in El Salvador. So they were like, let's move back, let's raise our children there. And so I got to grow up in my home country from the ages of 1 to about 12.
It's amazing.
Which is such a gift. I know. Spanish was my first language.
Wow.
I felt so connected to the nature, my country, which I know is for children of immigrants, it's not something that a lot of people get to have, because most people's parents, if they're first generation, fled their countries hoping for a better life, right? And so most of the time they don't get to go back. They don't get to grow up there. Maybe they'll go visit family. But for me, I really had this gift that, when we moved to the States when I was 12, because it started becoming really dangerous in my country because of the gangs. The government was really unstable. We started having like a series of crazy earthquakes. And
crazy.
Yeah, like 8 point something.
So scary.
So scary. And so we moved back to the States. And at the age of 12, I was starting to become more self-conscious. Yeah. I wouldn't say self-aware. I would say more self-conscious. I was very conscious of who I was, what I looked like, what I sound like, mainly because I was different, right? I grew up in my home country where everybody spoke the same language as me. Everybody looked like me. Everybody was super tan, long dark hair.
Beautiful,
and
by the way.
Thank you. But, moving somewhere where everybody looks different, especially as a kid, all you want to do is be accepted, right? We're going back to that concept of, fundamentally, we all want the same things. We want to be loved, we want to be accepted, we want to feel worthy. And so if any of those things are stripped away as a kid, it begins to really mess with our psyche. We talk about, folks who identify as women, but also men suffering with things like eating disorders, with body dysmorphia, right? At the root of all of this is just wanting to be loved, wanting to feel worthy. And so for me, this sort of psychological game began of, okay, in order to fit in, I need to look like the other kids. In order to fit in, I need to sound like the other kids. And what's funny is today I speak English, and people would never believe that Spanish was my first language.
Wow.
And there was a reason for that. I didn't speak Spanish for the longest time after moving to the States. And it wasn't until my mid-20s when I started going through, I guess it was my Saturn return that really kicked everything off for me, as it does for so many people. And we can talk about that too for those listening and don't know what it is. But I really started realizing that a big wound was self-acceptance and also connection with my ancestors. And so the moment I began sort of excavating that, and it was triggering, it was hard, I also started receiving so much medicine from it. And so reclaiming like who I am, where I come from, reclaiming my culture, has been a big part of my healing journey. And, to kind of close the circle on my background and talking about mess being my message, because of this lack of self-acceptance, I began to numb a lot in my teenage years, in my, late teens and my early 20s. And that involved a lot of substance abuse, that involved just a lot of numbing in ways that were so self-destructive. Was always sort of teetering on and off with some sort of eating disorder. And it wasn't until, I was 21 when I discovered yoga. And I'll never forget my first experience of being in my body in a way that felt safe. During Shavasana, in a way where I felt I was in my body, but I didn't want to run away from it. I wanted to be in it because I felt so much connection and gratitude for it. And that was sort of the beginning of this journey that I've been on until today, gonna be 33 soon. So it's been, 12 years of yeah, this deepening of returning home, of returning back to myself.
You're amazing. Listening to your episode this morning, when you shared with me, like, the moment where you realized that you were safe and had maybe a taste of returning home was when you were in Shavasana. And you mentioned this song, and I was like, okay, I think it was like something taboo.
Yeah, it's called Smoky Taboo.
Yes.
It's such a weird song.
No, but then I was like, I need to, like, look this up on YouTube so I can, like, feel her experience.
Yeah.
And I did, and I actually loved the song, first of all.
It's
very eclectic.
Very eccentric, very eclectic. I'm also like, what an interesting choice for a Shavasana song.
That's
but
what I
think it was just so different, and I was in such like a raw state.
Yeah.
It's like, it was just like so ingrained in my body that anytime I listen to that song, it brings me back. No, it's a memorable song.
It is.
And
I think, like, what's super interesting about all of this is, when we think about your background and you coming to America and your mess and experiencing eating disorder and self-worth and all the things, and typically that stems from, like, not being able to control something. And this is another topic that we could absolutely go into because I myself have also experienced an eating disorder. And I think it's something that always kind of lives with you, like that voice.
Yes.
And you're always having to heal it.
Yes.
And I think that is so applicable with, like, really any adversity in life, is just tending to yourself, tending to your soul, tending to your heart. And for me, a lot of that journey, like, where it stems for is spirituality.
Yeah.
And, I haven't really spoken about this on my podcast, and I've been waiting to bring in the right soul. And I really want to understand your experience with spirituality or religion and how that really formed into your relationship with God, the universe, whatever that may be for you today.
Yeah, well, thank you for trusting me with that big topic that I will preface by saying I'll share from just my lived experience. And then however it lands on people, they can take it or leave it, because I feel like this topic, while it's been very, I don't want to say commodified, maybe it's just become very mainstream, very trendy, which I think is totally okay. Like, I think intentions are good, right? I always think about intention, and I think intentions are good for the most part, but I also know it can be very triggering for people, especially people who have trauma with religion, trauma with any sort of realm within that realm. And, I think for me I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. who said, every generation must find God for themselves. And I could be totally, like, butchering who said this quote, so don't quote me on that, who said the quote. But it was something along the lines of that. And I think the beauty in that is that what people consider sacred is so unique to their soul's blueprint, right? And while, yes, we can agree that you feel something when you're in church and the choir is singing and it's moving through you, every person's experience of that is so different and unique to how they perceive it and what comes up for them. And so I'm forgetting what even the question was, but
how did you discover spirituality in your relationship to God or the universe, whatever you call it?
Yeah. So I was raised, and I'll call it Christ consciousness. And what I mean by that is a lot of the different denominations that stemmed from Jesus Christ's teachings. And so I was raised in a lot of Christ consciousness. I grew up going to Catholic school, and then my dad had a come to Jesus moment, quite literally, that saved his life.
Wow.
And he completely shifted the man that he was. And so for him, that was his access point. And so being the patriarch of our family, he wanted to guide us all through this sort of philosophy and way of living that he felt really impacted his life in a positive way. That being said, I wasn't ready to fully accept that as my truth. And so I had a lot of hard time sort of reconciling that this was God and this is what you're supposed to feel, and the teachings in the Bible are to be lived by and believed without sort of reflecting for yourself if it rings true. And I think what was hardest for me it was just identifying as a woman. And a lot of the teachings in the Bible, you know, certain denominations, like women were not allowed to wear pants, women are not allowed to cut their hair, and there's just a lot of limitations. And so I think my experience growing up in these really intense denominations of church caused me to rebel for a long time. And then I remember when I finally was old enough to be like, I'm never going to church again, I'm never, you know, and I started to party a lot and kind of go down that avenue. I lost myself for a bit, and again, it was through yoga that I came back and started exploring what divinity meant to me, what sacredness meant to me, and within that also started perceiving the unseen and what that meant for me through, you know, we experience life through our five senses, right? Sight, sound, touch, smell, taste, but we can perceive things beyond that maybe are more subtle, more ethereal. And so I started becoming really interested in that realm because I could always feel like I could perceive things, and we all can. That's the thing, like we all can. It's just a matter of, are we open to leaning in? Do we feel safe in that? And there's no right or wrong answer. It's just what feels good to you. And so, you know, at the same time with yoga, I started becoming very interested in other religions and other traditions and other philosophies. And so I started navigating Buddhism, I started navigating Taoism, became really interested in just the metaphysical sort of philosophies, also started getting interested in psychology and just all of these different avenues that kind of pointed at the same thing. You know, a lot of the religions point at the same thing, and it's, to me, this sense of there's something beyond the physical experience of a human that can't be grasped, it can't be touched, but it can be felt, right? And so, to me is like feeling that sense of connection that unites everybody. And what I love is that now science is catching up and giving so much language through quantum physics to things that, you know, there is this fabric that unites every living being on every planet, on every universe. And it's been a really beautiful journey of just exploring and defining things for myself, right? I think I've always just had the personality that I'm not willing to just accept things at face value. Like I always want to know the mechanisms and the intricacies, which is sometimes to my own detriment. But it's been a beautiful journey of just defining what the sacred feels like to me and honoring that it's different for everybody.
So beautiful. Can you share an example of this feeling of like the unseen? Like when does this sort of experience or feeling like show up for you the most in your life?
I'll share an example that kind of ties into my work. So I sit with cacao a lot. Cacao is a Mayan medicine. It's basically chocolate before it's processed, but it's in its raw form. It's very euphoric. It's very medicinal. It's a heart opener. Wow. Physiologically, it actually vasodilates our blood, our veins, and so we're pumping more blood. But energetically, it's been used by the Mayan people ritualistic, ceremonially for thousands of years. And I am of Mayan lineage, and so for me, I always felt really connected to it. But my first cacao ceremony I was invited to, I had no idea what it was. I just, this guy invited me, and I was like, sure, I have nothing else to do. This is maybe like 7 years ago. And my grandmother had passed away 3 months before that, and bless her soul, may she rest in peace. I mean, she's still so present in my life, just in a different way. And she passed away from Alzheimer's. So it was actually, it was actually like a beautiful thing that she transitioned, because if anybody has lost anyone to Alzheimer's, they know it's hard towards the end, so I was happy that she transitioned in peace and her soul could finally be free, but I hadn't connected with her since. I felt like she's gone, like, okay, wow, she's gone. I think that was the first experience of loss that I had ever had of somebody super close to me. And, you know, I went to my first cacao ceremony and I drank the cup, and cacao is not hallucinogenic. Okay. Cacao, you don't have a psychedelic experience. But I closed my eyes and I felt this presence arrive. Wow. And with my eyes closed, I fully saw my grandmother sitting in front of me. And I was like, whoa.
With your eyes closed?
With my eyes closed, amazing. Yeah. And I was just sitting with her. And she was like, I'm always with you. And what's beautiful is that, you know, me being of Mayan descent, my grandmother being of Mayan descent, this is a medicine that our people have been using for so long. That was an access point for me to connect with the unseen. And, you know, it's like that's a lived experience for me that maybe somebody will say, well, maybe you were just imagining it. Maybe, but to me it was real. You know what I mean? And so that's an example of it. I think the most tangible example that people experience every day is just synchronicities. You know, when you feel like, I don't know, like synchronicities that just happen that remind you you're exactly where you're meant to be or give you the message that you're meant to hear. It's like, how do you explain those things, you know? You can't. But that's an example.
I love that. And I always love to give like my audience like specific examples so they're able to be like, whoa, like I've been here, I can relate, this is tangible. And those two examples were beautiful. And I think when we hear, you know, on social media, they're like, oh, like it's the universe or it's a sign. Like I think those are also like other easy examples of like what we're talking about.
Totally.
Because it's so real.
Yeah, they say that synchronicity is the language of the universe. And so for people listening, the more that you start paying attention to them, the more that they start happening. And that's when I really see, like for the clients that I work with, for the people in my community, for me, first and foremost, the more that I notice the synchronicities, the more that obstacles fall away, doors open, things shift, and you kind of just surrender to it.
I love that. And you know what's really interesting, like from my experience, typically when I'm in like go, you know, not really feeling connected or feeling a little bit off track, like with like myself and my center, I miss a lot of things and I miss opportunities. Or even if I'm thinking about, okay, like the universe, but I'm not actually like deeply connecting and like having that intention to connect, I don't really have the same experience. But I think when I'm like, I'm making the intention and I'm going to look up and just have a moment with the universe and be like, I'm ready. Or like have my back through this experience. Like whatever it may be, I feel like the action of looking up or having your heart on, or your hand on your heart, or just having a moment of pausing and like actively communicating with the universe for me has been really game changing into seeing like, whoa, that was an open door. Whoa, that was a sign. This is where I'm supposed to be.
Yes.
So I think that's been super cool for my experience.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. What it makes me think about is maybe those listening have heard of chakras. Maybe you haven't. But there are these energetic centers that the Vedas, the Siddhas, who were these just sages in ancient India, talked about. And what's interesting is that the lower energy centers are associated with the emotions of survival, of security, right? Like the very dense parts of this reality, which is where most people's focus is. When we're living out of fight or flight, we're living in these lower centers. What's interesting is that as we move up through the energy centers, it starts to become more subtle, right? We begin to get in touch with, this is sort of like the access point of the heart space, of compassion, of love, of forgiveness, of getting more into the subtle realms of communication and then intuition and then connecting with the divine. And so I think a very tangible way to ground this for people is if we're living out of a state of survival, it's impossible for our energy to move up because it's focused on survival. And so if doing that breath work is going to take us into a state of rest and digest, then the body can put resources into moving energy up. And so it's it's important to calm our nervous system, not just for health, but also to have these magical experiences. If we're living out of a state of survival, which I also want to acknowledge the privilege that it is to be able to not live in a state of survival, right? Sometimes survival is the only mode that people know because they have to put food on the table and they have, babies depending on them, or there's a war zone going outside of their home. There's so much suffering in the world right now that I also just want to acknowledge that living out of a state of survival can mean very many different things for different people depending on their situation, where they are in the world. But if you are somebody who has the privilege to be able to go pay for the yoga class and take an hour out of your day to go nourish yourself, first acknowledge what a privilege that is, and therefore you have the responsibility to have a regulated nervous system for those who can't, right? Because then we can get into the even bigger topic of coherence in the collective, right? If everybody's in a state of fight or flight, then that's the coherence of the collective. If we have people who have the privilege and therefore the responsibility to reset their nervous system, then we're beginning to change the frequency of the collective coherence, right? And so it's hard to access these higher states of consciousness and awareness if we're living out of a state of survival. And if you have the ability to not be in that all the time, then you have the ability to perhaps have those experiences that a sense of safety, a sense of grounding is required to do so.
That is super helpful for me, and I think I just had like a pivot, because when we think about being in fight or flight or stressed, like speaking to my personal experience, like this is something that I'm working on daily, but it's this constant go, getting the next task done, comparing ourselves to others. And I'm speaking from like a very privileged place, right? Like, but if you're able to kind of shift it into like, I get to experience these things, I get the opportunity to spend whatever it may be to take a core power class or go to the open studio and take a meditation class or a breathwork class. Like, if I get to do that for the health of our world, for me to show up here to create an impact and provide support and resources for those who need it, like that shift for me is super powerful, because it doesn't become about yourself anymore. It really becomes about others and our world and the suffering that's happening. And like, there are things that we can do, even though there's not a lot. I think that is maybe one of the steps that we can take individually.
Totally.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I do want to kind of go into another pathway here and open the doors into talking about Dharma. And this is really beautiful, because I'm not seeing lots of conversation around Dharma kind of in like my niche or world or target audience, right? Like, we're speaking to 20-something women. And there is kind of some talk, but I really want to understand, like, from your perspective, Natalie, and being the expert, like, what does Dharma mean? And like, what does it mean in your life being a 33-year-old woman? And like, what we can kind of learn from you.
Yeah, thank you. So Dharma is rooted in Vedic philosophy, which is the philosophy from which yoga stems from. And so I also just want to say this isn't directly my culture, my tradition, but it's a tradition that I've really just learned to embrace and appreciate and love, because it's been so impactful for me. And so Dharma loosely translates to soul purpose, what you came here to do. Now, I think in the Western world, a lot of people associate that with the work that you're meant to do in this world, right? You're meant to have a podcast, you're meant to be a coach, you're meant to, have a restaurant. And while those aspects can be a part of your Dharma is also related to the relationships that you have, the pursuits that you feel inclined to engage in, and the way in which you move in this world, and the impact that you're meant to have just by being who you are. And so I say that to also share that I work with people. I'm a Dharma coach, and the way in which that manifests for the way that I work with people is I work a lot with women who are entrepreneurs, as particularly in the wellness space. And so for them, a lot of their soul purpose is very tied with their vocation, because it's what they do for their work. It's their soulpreneurs. They feel like they have this in their heart. They want to share with the world, to be of service. And so what's really beautiful is that, again, that is a privilege that some people get to have. And so while yes, like that is certainly an aspect of it, your dharma can also be to be a mother, right? Your dharma can be the relationships that you have, the friendship breakups that you have, the way in which you were meant to be there for each other to grow, to then, go separate ways. And in the lens of dharma and what you do for work, it's also like how you bring your unique gifts forward. Beautiful. To share them, because we each have our unique gifts. In Spanish, it's called dones, like the gifts that you're born with, that you're meant to share, whether it's through your personality or the way that you see the world, or it can be manifested in a myriad of different ways. But I think what's so beautiful about that is that it's rooted in this philosophy that we each came here for a reason. We each incarnated at this time with the exact people that you incarnated with, be it your parents, your friends, right? These people that we have soul contracts with that are going to play out, some for better, some for worse, but we can stay grounded in the knowing that everything that is happening right now is happening for my greatest good. Even if it's hard, even if it's challenging, even if it's heartbreaking, as long as you stay in your alignment of your values, of living your life through the guidance of the compass of your heart, then you can trust that everything that's happening for you is happening for your greatest good, even if you can't see it right now.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Thank you for breaking. My first dog ever, my parents named our beagle Dharma. And that was like my first experience with Dharma. But it's so sad because we didn't keep the dog. Oh. My brother was like terrified of Dharma.
Yeah.
So we had to return her. It was devastating for me. But
I'm sorry.
But the word will always like hold a special place in my heart. Just fun fact.
Oh.
And I am curious, so like going back to your definition of Dharma, are there any like specific steps that like we can take to like discover that within ourselves?
Follow your curiosity and follow your highest excitement. Even if it doesn't make sense to anybody else, follow it. There's magic in there for you.
That's super powerful.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah. So, my husband, he is he like supports startups. He's a financial consultant for startups, and he's always had a deep passion for soil regeneration. And when we moved into our house, we were gifted this bin of worms that our friends didn't want anymore, like for decomposing food. Yeah. And my husband geeked out, like loved the worms. Like we even named them.
Seriously?
There's like thousands of them. Anyways, and I was like, interesting. He's super curious and he's super excited. I'm just going to let him do his thing. Lo and behold, this man has become the biggest soil regeneration advocate through reintroducing the soil microbiome through worm compost, through worm castings, worm poop.
Wow.
Like, to anybody, like, to think,
I don't even know what that means, but it sounds amazing.
Like, worm poop is his highest excitement. But it's now opened this whole channel for him to pursue this whole new journey of soil regeneration.
Wow. Very random, but that is what lights him up.
That was his highest excitement. And I was like, part of me was like, is this weird? But now I'm stoked, I'm like, it's so important.
I know.
Putting, like, good bacteria back into the soil is what's going to save the world.
100%.
That's a whole other episode we could do. But that's an example.
I love that.
So, like, even if it's weird, even if it doesn't make sense, like, follow your curiosity, follow your highest excitement. Go take the class and the thing you've been wanting. Go take a pottery class. You don't have to have your own pottery shop. Just go take a class.
I love that. And I think like one of my mentors, she would always tell me like, follow the fun.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a perfect example of that. Because we're dynamic human beings. We are supposed to explore the different parts of ourselves, and that's what life is for. It doesn't have to just be one-dimensional about your career. Like, we are dynamic beings, and we were supposed to experience multiple things and multiple layers of life. So I love that, and I cannot believe we are already at the end of today's episode. Like, Natalie, I don't even understand that.
I know.
But I would love to introduce you to this segment that I would like to call Syllabus Steps. And this is really a time for us to really think about what we spoke about today and get a deeper understanding of, looking at your spiritual journey, of, finding your relationship with the universe, God, and also your relationship with Dharma and finding your purpose. Were there any specific tools, books, podcasts, whatever it might be, that has helped you and really becoming who you are today?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, for sure, the book, The Alchemist.
Amazing.
And this is so dated, but The Secret was something that changed my life back in, like, I don't know, what was it, 2011 or something?
It's unbelievable.
And yeah, I think podcasts, I have to shout out my girls, Lindsay and Krista. They're like pioneers of personal evolution through sharing stories. The podcast hosts of Almost 30, they're actually dear friends, and just want to give them their flowers, because even before I met them, their podcast got me through so much. So people who listen to your podcast, I'm sure feel the same. What was the other piece?
Just any like mindsets or activities.
Yes. So I'm obsessed with this quote by Carl Jung right now, and it is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it'll direct your life and you'll call it fate. And so what that means is figure out what your unconscious beliefs are about yourself that are holding you back, and then rewrite those. And the best way to do that is to sit in silence with yourself. We live in such an overly stimulated world that meditation is actually the salve for so many issues. And so if you can just find 5 minutes of your day to sit in silence with yourself, it's so cheesy, but I love speaking in like poetry. Close your eyes so you can see. To look inward. And for me, journaling has been such a powerful tool. Therapy, can't recommend it enough. And I think that I want to leave people with that. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it'll direct your life and you'll call it fate.
It's beautiful. I also want to give you a shout out. The Practical Alchemy podcast is unbelievable.
Thank you.
Your ability to storytell and bring on just influential people with a voice of inspiring story. It's incredible. You've done a brilliant job, and I think everyone listening has to listen to your podcast.
Thank you.
Seriously.
Thank you.
I'm going to leave this with a little game, which is a fill in the blank. So, Natalie, are you ready? Regardless of blank, I am blank.
Regardless of my external environment, I am always at peace.
Beautiful. I love that. Natalie, you're so incredible, and I would love to give you the mic for just a second to share some of the really exciting things coming up in your future.
Thank you. Well, I am in the process of co-founding a nonprofit called Wellness for the People, and we're going to throw 2 incredible festivals in LA and New York. They're wellness festivals happening in October. So keep an eye out. We're going to be offering scholarships for accessibility. We're going to be bringing some incredible speakers, like people that I'm actually going to be nervous to meet.
Really?
I'm stoked. And I'm just excited to be able to share everything that's helped me with folks out there who need it.
Wow. I am just so impressed.
Thank you.
I'm so excited for you. You're the best.
Thank you. Yay!
New episodes drop every Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.